Good morning, Dr. Emma. Today our group will be presenting the insurance case, which is about Malaysia's motor insurance pool versus Tirumaya Singgala. To provide a better understanding of the case, we will first show a short animation that summarizes the overall story and the key events leading to the dispute. This animation serves as a brief introduction, and we will explain the facts, legal issues, court findings, and the court decisions in details later in our presentations. So, let's start with the animations and get an overview of the case.
Mr. Tirumaya Singgara Velu purchased a motor insurance policy to protect his vehicle. The insured vehicle is driving on a public road when an unexpected accident suddenly takes place. Later, he submitted a claim to Malaysian Motor Insurance Pool, seeking compensation for the damages caused by the accident. However, the insurer disputed the claim and refused to accept liability. As a result, the case was brought before the court. After examining the insurance policy and the facts of the case, the court reached its final decision.
Now I'll be introducing the case of Malaysian Motor Insurance Pool versus Tirumaya Singgara Velu, which is a significant case in Malaysian motor insurance law. This case examines the extent of an insurer's liability under a motor insurance policy and provides important guidance on the interpretation of insurance coverage. The Federal Court was required to determine how certain policy provisions should be applied, particularly in situations involving authorized drivers. The case is significant for several reasons. First, it clarifies the interpretation of exclusion clauses in insurance policies. Second, it confirms the legal protection available to authorized drivers under motor insurance coverage. Finally, it reinforced the rights of accident victims to seek and obtain compensation. For these reasons, the case remains an important reference in understanding motor insurance law in Malaysia. Moving on to the case background, the case began when a lorry owner purchased a motor insurance policy from Malaysian Motor Insurance Pool, or MMIP. Tirumaya Singgara Velu was employed as a lorry attendant, while the lorry was operated by an authorized driver. During the course of employment, the authorized driver negligently reversed the lorry and injured Tirumaya while he was carrying out his work duties. As a result of the accident, a compensation claim was made against the driver. However, MMIP refused to identify the authorized driver. The insurer argued that Tirumaya was an employee of the insured vehicle owner and therefore fell within the employee exclusion clause stated in the insurance policy. Because of this disagreement, the matter was brought before the courts for legal determination. The dispute eventually reached the Federal Court, where a final decision was made regarding the insurer's liability and the protection provided to authorized drivers under motor insurance policies.
This case has two main parties. The appearance is the Malaysian Motor Insurance Pool. It is an insurer that covers high-risk or hard-to-insure vehicles in Malaysia. It collects money from insurance companies to help pay accident claims. In this case, it disagrees with the lower court decisions and says it should not be responsible to pay. The respondent is the Tirumaya Singgara Velu. He is a victim of a lorry accident. He made a claim as an injured third party and asked for compensations. He supported the lower court decisions in his favor.
Now, I would like to present the key reason why the court held the insurer liable. First, contractual interpretation. The court examined the motor insurance policy and found no clause that clearly excluded MMIP's liability toward the injured employee. Since exclusion clauses must be explicit and are interpreted strictly against the insurer, MMIP could not rely on the policy wording to avoid responsibility. Second, common law principles. The court referred to established insurance law principles, emphasizing that third-party victims should be protected whenever possible. Therefore, the insurer remained responsible because the authorized driver was covered under the policy. Third, statutory interpretation. The court interpreted the Road Transport Act 1987 in line with its purpose, which is to protect road accident victims. The act was written in a way that promotes compensation rather than restricting it. Finally, the workman's compensation argument. MMIP argued that the employee should claim under workman's compensation law instead. However, the court rejected this argument, explaining that workman's compensation and motor insurance claims are separate remedies and can exist simultaneously. In conclusion, the court prioritized victim protection and found that MMIP remained liable under the motor insurance policy.
To conclude the court finding, the court held that MMIP could not rely on the employer exclusions over liability. The insurance policy did not clearly exclude coverage for the injured employee, and the Road Transport Act was interpreted in a way that protected accident victims. Therefore, the insurer remained responsible under the policy. As for the final outcome, the court found that the injured employee was entitled to compensations The availability of workman compensations did not prevent the employee from making an insurance claim. In addition, MMIP was required to identify the authorized driver for liability arising from the accident. As a result, the appeal was dismissed and compensations were awarded to the injured employee. Overall, this case reinforced the principle that compulsory motor insurance exists to protect accident victims, and the insurers cannot avoid liability unless there is a clear exclusion under the law or the insurance policy.
At the High Court, the decision was in favor of the insurer. The court found that the injured worker was an employee of the insurer company and was injured during the courses of the employment. Therefore, the employee exceptions under Section 91 1AA of the Road Transport Act 1987 apply, meaning the insurer was not required to indemnify the driver. However, the Court of Appeal reversed this decision. The court held that the insurance policy effectively created two separate contracts, one with the insurer, another one with the authorized driver. Since the injured worker was not an employee of the authorized driver, the employee exceptions did not apply to him. Finally, the Federal Court affirmed the Court of Appeal ruling and dismissed the insurer's appeal. The court confirmed that the authorized driver has an independent right of the indemnity under the policy. As a result, the insurers remained liable to indemnify the authorized driver. The key legal principle established is that the employee exceptions only excluded liability when the injured person is an employee of the party seeking indemnity. First, the court emphasized the importance of judicial precedent. It refused to depart from established common law and declined to rely on sopuiwa, because the decision was delivered without written ground. Without clear reasoning, the case could not be dated as the blind authorities. Second, the court adopted a broad and victim protective interpretations of the Road Transport Act 1987. The Act primarily proposed is to protect road accident victims, and any policy exclusion must be interpreted consistently with that objective. The court also reaffirmed the principle established in United Oriental Insurance versus Lim Eng Yu. Therefore, the court applied the two-contract doctrine. It held that the insurance policy created two separate relationships, one between the insurer and the insurer owner, and another between the insurer and the authorized driver. Therefore, the authorized driver enjoyed an independent right of indemnity under the policy. Finally, the court stressed that exclusion clauses must be interpreted strictly. The employee exceptions only apply when the injured person is an employee of the party seeking indemnity, since the injured worker was employed by the vehicle owner and not by the authorized driver. The exclusion could not be realized upon. In conclusion, the Federal Court prioritized legal certainties, victim protections, and a fair interpretation of insurance coverage, ultimately confirming the authorized driver right to indemnity.
From this case, there are three main lessons learned. First, statutory law prevails over insurance contract terms. The Road Transport Act 1987 overreads any inconsistent policies, wording, and courts will strictly apply exclusion clauses. This so that the law takes priority over contract. Second, the main purpose of motor insurance law is to protect third-party victims. The focus is to ensure innocent accident victims are compensated rather than letting insurer avoid liability through technical exclusion. Third, insurer must clearly understand both policy terms and legal rules. Proper interpretations of insurance wording and the RTA is important to decide liability correctly and avoid wrong decisions. Overall, this case highlights that statutory obligations and public protections are more important than restrictive insurance clauses.